Hello. I have decided to do several videos on my own life and how my life has informed my approach and my investment as a coach. How what I do as a coach has been completely informed by the experiences that I've lived through. So, in the previous video, I spoke about my preteen childhood, the traumas that occurred from that. And this video is to focus on the high school years. My high school was amazing. I was incredibly lucky to go to the high school that I had. And I formed incredible friendships, met some amazing people. I'm still friends with many of them to this day. So this is 30-year friendships, which is quite amazing. And that part of my high school experience really was quite incredible. It was also reasonably gay-friendly, queer-friendly school at the time, and I flourished. And although I wasn't a great academic, I had to work very, very hard at my academics. I found my voice. I found what started to feel like a chosen family. And in that way, my high school years were absolutely amazing. I still look back on them very, very fondly. But in terms of what was going on at home and in my own family, that was a different story. It was in my final year, in my matric year, in our grade 12 year, that my mother was diagnosed with stomach cancer. Years later, she would say it came from not being able to stomach her 25-year marriage to my father. And I think that there is a huge amount of truth to that. Won't get into that in this video, but I do believe that our bodies begin to manifest the issues that we carry around in our lives. So mom was diagnosed with stomach cancer. That's shock one. Trauma begins there. All of this, bear in mind, happened within the same year. So she was diagnosed with stomach cancer. My father, the malignant narcissist that he was, and you'll learn this about narcissists, they make everything about them. Everything that is going on with you, they see it as some kind of a reflection on them. Now, when I was about 17 or 18 years old, when this was all going on, you don't know this. So I was just watching his behavior, utterly confused and perplexed that he was often angry and sullen and morose during this period of time while my mother wasn't well. Years later, I would understand, narcissists can't deal with anything that doesn't seem perfect or pristine or whatever doesn't fit their fantasy. And my mother's illness did not suit my father's fantasy. So he took it personally. It was the strangest thing, as if he himself had been diagnosed with it. It's quite mind-numbing, isn't it? Those of you who have family, it's another reason I'm doing these videos. Those of you who have family with mental health disorders or personality disorders, if you don't know what you're dealing with, you get utterly confused and disheveled and emotionally discombobulated and dysregulated. I know because I lived it for years. And what ended up happening was my father also had an affair that year with the very same lady who was from the Bible group that my sister was attending. And my sister knew before anybody else did what this lady's intentions were, because she had made it very, very clear to the whole Bible group that she was on the hunt for a rich husband. And cue my father. This all while my mother is, of course, going through what you go through once you've heard you've had a diagnosis. Viewer, I want to ask you a question in this moment. If you were diagnosed, or someone close to you were diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, how would you respond? Would it alter your rhythm? Would it change how you feel? Would it affect how you engaged and listened to the world around you? Or would you just carry on as normal? I couldn't understand. And this was all, by the way, happening over a period of time where I was the only one at home. My sister had gone to America. She had gone to study in the States. My brother left home when he was 16. I was 8 years old at the time. So by the time I was in high school, I was witnessing all of this at home completely on my own. The shock of the cancer, his bizarre reaction to it, the fighting that was coming about. And then a little bit later, he obviously started this affair. And my mom, in the interim, had also gone into hospital. And thank goodness the cancer operation was successful. They had to remove 90% of her stomach. She was left with 10%. This will change your relationship to food. She left the hospital. Well, I might as well mention that now. By the time she got out of hospital, they had almost lost her in ICU twice. The operation for the cancer was successful, but she had respiratory failure, and that was why they almost lost her twice. So she was in ICU for weeks. And over all of this time, I didn't realize it at the time. I had to put the puzzle pieces together much later. At the time, my father was having an affair with this woman from a Bible group. And I was still in school. I was in my grade 12 year. I still remember I was in a musical at that first part of the year, and in a weird way, thank goodness for it, because it kept me occupied. But all this time later, I look back and I think, what madness was going on? So mom's cancer, there's the trauma around that. Father's affair and the beginnings of the abandonment of the family around that, because of course, you know, my mother was no longer the ideal or whatever it is that the narc wants. Because of course they all live in a fantasy world, but I'll get into that in another video. And his selfishness was quite mind-numbing to me. I also remember over that period of time, he never once checked in with me. It was just him and me at home. My mother was obviously in hospital, so he never checked in. Never once as a father would ask me, how is I doing with this mom that I was incredibly close to, the closest person in my lifetime. That was the closest relationship I'd ever had. And she was dying, or there was the threat of death. To say abandonment trauma, I think, is a bit of an understatement. And I didn't realize that was what I was also going through. And what ended up happening later on in the year was when my mother was eventually let go and let out of hospital, she was absolutely emaciated, a stick figure. She couldn't breathe properly. She couldn't walk. She couldn't get from one chair to the next without help. She couldn't bathe without help. She couldn't eat anything because, of course, you know, she's only got 10% of her stomach left. So her whole relationship to food had to be rediscovered. And all of this, while she's hanging, her health is hanging on by a thread. I remember one evening in particular, bear in mind over this year, there'd been a lot of fighting between the two of them. But this one evening stood out because he had lost his mind. And I was down the corridor and I heard him yelling, and he was screaming about how things were going to be, what he was expecting my mother and the rest of their lives and whatever it was that he was delusional about. Bear in mind, this is all while he has already been having an affair with another person. And he is throwing the beds around and the mattresses and the furniture. He turned into an animal. And my mother was so terrified, she found his gun, his firearm, and was in the corner, the stick figure in the corner holding this gun, terrified, thinking she had to protect herself against this animal. And I stood in. I got into the middle of them. And, you know, in those years, I wasn't afraid of my father. I was afraid of what he could do, but I wasn't afraid of him. And I made it very, very clear to him what I thought of him. And he was losing his mind and his crap at me, and I managed to get the gun away from my mother and hide it. But this is the level of hostility and trauma, really, that comes out of homes. I mention this story because I want my clients to know there is nothing that you have gone through, especially within your family unit, that I am not ready for, prepared for. There is no emotion that you can have that I have not experienced, that I do not have the tools and the capacity to catch you if you need. But I'm sharing these stories because I really want my clients to know that they are not alone. I wish I had someone a bit like me at the time when I was going through what I was going through, because I had seen a couple of psychologists, and with great respect to them, it wasn't helping. I needed somebody who had gone through something similar to me and had survived it. So that happened, and all of this within the same year. And it got quite bad to the point that I remember it now as I'm speaking, that the teachers must have known what was going on. You know, in the first part of the year, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and there's all of that. But by the latter part of the year, there's all of this drama that they're hearing is coming from the Feinstein household, to the point that all of the teachers seem to leave me alone. And my drama teacher, who was also my friend at the time, remarkable lady, she just said to me, Steve, just come to my room. You can come and sit in my room. And I did that for quite a bit of time. And it was in one of those days where I wasn't actually in class because I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate. I was so overwhelmed. I had such anxiety. I was so hypervigilant. My nervous system was shutting down. And I could hear my name called over the high school intercom. And I was called out of school to go to the front desk, and I went to the front desk and I was told that I was leaving school and my lift was outside, and my lift took me to a psychologist's offices. Dear viewer, wow. I look back now and I think that poor psychologist, he had no idea what was coming. No idea. By this stage, and I can look back and I understand what had happened. My father had set up the psychologist's meeting, not to address a damn thing, not to speak about anything that would be, towards fixing or solving the family. No. He was there to tell us, and I'll never forget the phrase. He said, I have decided that I will make for myself a new family. The words I remember at the time feeling incredibly surreal, alternative. It would be much later when I started to do the work that I do now that I completely understood him better. I wish I knew this at the time, and I certainly wish the psychologist at the time knew this. Narcissists treat everybody like objects, family, children included. You are not an individual to a narcissist. They see you as an extension of them. And they only like and appreciate you if you are playing out what Sam Vaknin would call the shared fantasy. So if you stay in the shared fantasy with them, no problem. But if you start to function like a normal person, and that means you will have alternative points of view, you won't always agree. Life is a wonderful, complex tapestry. And if you come from any point of view, any belief, anything that contradicts the shared fantasy, or sometimes I would call it the narcissistic script. If you get off that narcissistic script, you will be punished. And they'll do it in weird and wonderful ways. It depends on the narcissist. It depends, are they a cerebral narcissist? Are they a somatic narcissist? Are they a covert? Are they an overt? Are they a communal? It depends what you're dealing with, and the approach changes slightly. But at the end of the day, they can't handle anybody who betrays the fantasy. And obviously, between my mother and I especially, we had done that. We had completely betrayed the fantasy. And my father obviously had met this other lady who was playing into the fantasy. So, and narcissists don't do anything until the next person is lined up. So it was incredibly calculated, and my father was absolutely Machiavellian in that way. And he knew that he was going to leave. And in fact, he made that statement, I've decided I will make for myself a new family. And he left. And I can't remember all of the details. Eventually, my brother left. My sister had left. My sister at the time, who had already known what was going on with this other woman and felt like she was carrying this information privately. So she was heavily conflicted. And my mom and I, and then I still remember sitting alone. Everyone had left. And I had been listening to the family yelling and ranting and raving at each other. And by this point, I was so dissociated. I'd so left the building that I was staring out the window and I was looking at the psychologist's kid playing under the tree. And that got my focus. I was watching that. And it's an interesting metaphor because I think I had stared out the window in many ways, in lots of ways. And this is what you do, don't you? To cope with the toxic environment. If you have no tools, you will dissociate. So all of this happened within that year. And then the divorce proceedings would start. My father had set everything up in such a way that his new fantasy was going to take off. Viewer, for those of you watching and relating, and it would be very interesting to hear your comments, and please do comment in the comment box below. I'd be keen to hear your story because I saw my father change. And he was always a problem, but he at least seemed, because it's strange with narcissists, they seem a particular way until you know better. He seemed as if he was still trying to keep the family together, the original family together. No, it had nothing to do with that. That was all narcissistic control and manipulation. Once he knew that he had found a new fan, because that's all a narc wants, they don't want anyone who is a fully realized individual, securely attached person. They want someone who's going to be in need of them. So he found that. And as far as he was concerned, he was going to skip into the sunset. And he became malicious towards the family. Once he realized that I had no intention of living or staying with him, he treated me like, I used to say in those years, he treated me like a client, like a complete stranger. If I wanted to see him, I had to make an appointment, such was the nature of our connection. My father, during those divorce proceedings, he wanted to see us on the street. Narcissists have a venomous, poisonous engine driving them. And in order to feel better, they need to destroy you. And it depends on how they do that. And it depends what kind of narcissist you're dealing with at the time. But in our case, when we were dealing with a pathological, malignant narcissist, the unholy trinity, actually, he had Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. So, it is the unholy trinity. Once a person is there, there is no rational, there is no deal, there is no make them understand. You just have to get the hell away. We did not know the language for this at the time, dear viewer. We just thought we were dealing with a crazy person, somebody who was unstable. We didn't know what we were dealing with from one day to the next. We didn't know if it was going to be calm one moment or if we were going to be pushed out onto the streets into the next moment. Our lives over that period of time were unhinged. And I am making this video because I want people to know that when I am coaching you, yes, I am coming from a studied place, the psychological, the neurological, the neuroscience, NLP. I use many tools. I use metaphysical tools. I use a lot of tools, but I use all the tools that helped me. So my approach to my clients depends on my client. And I really want to impart and give people the sense of peace and the sense of connection to self that took me way too long to find. I will get into another video, which will be the years that passed this. So to get closer to concluding this video and this chapter of life, the divorce was about to happen. And mom was obviously still not well. She would take a number of years, in fact, to have a good day. So there was the trauma of the divorce, but there was also her healing. And my father didn't give a crap about that. Narcissists don't give a crap about anybody else's reality, especially if your reality isn't going well. That's when they will abandon you. That's how you will know what you are dealing with. I had a brother who did the exact same thing. So both the men in my family abandoned us. And that's the other reason I'm doing these videos. I want my clients to know that I relate to you more than you understand, more than you consciously know. And the way that I coach and the way that I work with my clients, yes, I am passionate because I've lived this. And I am also I'm quite a stick in the mud when it comes to certain things. I have clients telling me all sorts of stories about their families or loved ones, people who treat them in negative ways. And when I start to teach them things about personality disorders, you can start to, it depends on the individual, but sometimes there's almost a denial because they really do seduce us. These disorders, the cluster B personality disorders, they seduce us into a fantasy world of their making. And I did not know at the time, but the divorce was more than a divorce. It was the ending of a fantasy that I did not know I was in. So I had a whole version of reality that I had to understand with a mom who could barely move, walk, or talk. It's almost amazing that she survived that period of time. And she had me, and my sister wasn't around until much later because she was studying in the States. But when my sister did come back to South Africa, and this is where I will start to end this video because I'll pick it up with the next video. That was the time of life where my sister's decade-long, 10 years, count them, 10 years of the dark night of the soul began. And I can say now, in retrospect, that her dark night of soul, which included a lot of depression, which included coming in and out of institutions, which included a lot of ideations and attempts, and there were periods of time of self-harm. It wasn't, she was absolutely going through her own trauma, and I can say now partly it was her abandonment trauma. The relationship she had with my father was quite a unique one, and they seemed to be close. But once my father had met his new wife, because he did marry her later, he remarried for a third time later, because, you know, narcissists don't love, they possess. And once he possessed his new source of narcissistic supply, he abandoned my sister, and he was very overt about it, and he would humiliate and condemn and laugh at some of the most shocking revelations that she had gone through and was sharing with him. This was no longer a father. This was a Trump. Not that Trump is a father either, biologically sure, but in function, certainly not. It's not a bad analogy. My family knew of Trump before Trump was Trump, the way the world knows him, because we had our own version. The same level of selfishness, the same level of self-conceit, the same level of maddening, convincing himself that everybody else was against him. Because, you know, narcissists have what's called a fragile ego. I didn't know this all those years ago. I wish I'd known this. This would have helped me understand a lot. That a fragile ego means that they take everything personally. They take everything as an attack or an affront on them. Narcissists also have a very, very high paranoia. So, but as the divorce began and as issues with my sister started to come out more and rage and anger from me started coming out more, although in those years I was repressing everything else that I needed, my focus was on protecting my sister and my mother, but I wasn't working on me. That came much later. And I will mention this into the next video, but not working on me at that time had severe consequences. And I developed addictions that I would have to then work through much later. And thank goodness I did. But it was also a different dark night of soul. So my family was falling apart. And my brother had abandoned the family and had gone to do whatever it was that he was doing years before. We're very estranged. We don't even know who each other are. And my father was doing what my father was doing. And as I say, he wanted to see us on the streets because he just wanted the house, he wanted the possessions, he wanted what he wanted. Narcissists want to win. They do not care about your feelings. They do not care about your experience. They do not care that they have an impact on you. Your safety, your mental health, none of this stuff matters to them. And I am so passionate about helping my clients and everybody who is dealing with these pathological, some people would call them demonic. And, for years I kind of did. I understand why we would call them demonic. But, the funny thing is, if you really get enough distance from them and you've worked on yourself enough and the healing can actually begin, how you see them will change exponentially, my dear viewer. Exponentially. These people will not be scary to you. They will seem pathetic. They will seem like hollow husks of where a human should have been. They have two dominant emotions that drive them. And it's called in the literature pathological envy and pathological rage. That is what these people feel. And if I'd known that at the time, his behavior would have made a lot more sense to me. I didn't know this at the time. None of us knew this at the time. It just seemed like he had gone from being one sort of person to the next, a Jekyll and Hyde. And that is not just shocking, and it doesn't just change your physical reality, of course, things like divorce and moving and all that sort of thing. It also, and it can impact your physiology. It impacts your body. It impacts how you feel. It impacts how you then view and interpret and interact with the world. It changes how you dialogue with people. It changes your ability to hear. The damage that these toxic people do cannot be underestimated. And it is my hope that those of you watching this, especially if you are going through this in your family, reach out, get help. Don't do this on your own. It doesn't have to be endless amount of time, but you do need some help. I wish I had known what kind of help to ask for in those years. I didn't. And psychologists, at least at that period of time, knew nothing about personality disorders. They weren't trained in personality disorders. Some of them laugh at the idea of it. And I must be honest, and I know this is a very, very hot topic, but narcissism, this word has been thrown around so much lately that I don't think people really fully understand what it means. And they weaponize it and they use it as a way of insulting. A narcissist is a deeply wounded non-human. I'm going to say that again. They are a deeply wounded non-human. What do I mean by non-human? They do not have empathy. They do not have compassion. They do not have a working conscience. They do not practice accountability. They do not practice responsibility. They never apologize, and they keep repeating their offenses again and again and again and again. The only thing that changes is the target. That is the only thing that changes. And I want to help my clients because I want to help you find your peace and your serenity again. I want to help you find your individuality because these people are vampires and parasites. They are trying to take your life force away from you because they don't have any of their own. And when this is happening within a family unit, it can absolutely change your paradigm. And you must now still somehow function and operate in the world. It feels close to impossible. And it is even more traumatizing and brings up even more abandonment issues when you try and connect to friends or family who themselves maybe have not had this sort of experience. So they are re-traumatizing you because they are not acknowledging you. They are not validating you. They are almost looking at you, and this drives me crazy. They almost look at you and want to say, well, what's wrong with you? How are you making this happen? Why are you allowing this to happen? I'll get into this into the next video, but can you believe, in fact, you will, if you've watched the previous video and listened to what I have to say about my narcissistic father and how I was groomed from childhood to tolerate toxic male behavior. I had six toxic relationships, almost relationships, in a row with people who fall way too high on the narcissistic side of the spectrum. And it is a spectrum. It's important to say that it is a spectrum. So, and we are all on the spectrum, but I'm talking about the behavior. I'm talking about the malignancy. I'm talking about the selfishness. Men who lie, cheat, steal, use, abuse, and then somehow magically, because this is their pathology, talk themselves into a reason. They rationalize and justify in their bizarre head how what they are doing is okay, and that everybody else is the problem, and that everybody else is the issue, and that the narc is okay. So I had several relationships because I hadn't worked through my own issues. I hadn't worked on my subconscious programming. I hadn't worked on my attachment style problems. And all of this was stemming from my family. And this, dear viewer, is exactly why I'm doing these videos. I want you to know that you can change how you feel. You can feel life has the most wonderful things to offer, and you are able to experience it, but you've got to learn toxic. You've got to learn to identify it. You've got to learn how to detach from it. And then you've got to learn the tools that you need to bring yourself back to yourself, because these people change your entire paradigm. And you know, life is short. And unfortunately, this video isn't. And I have done my best to cover all as I possibly could in this chapter of my life. I'm sorry if it's gone on a little bit long. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for your time. I would love to hear your stories. And please like and share this video and comment in the comment box. And please do share the video if you have family or friends who you feel, you know, there are people who are going through this, and maybe they would also need some help and some assistance. Because I am waiting for you, arms wide open. And there is nothing that you have gone through and nothing that you feel that I do not relate to and that I would judge. I'm ready for you if you need it.